Hello and welcome to the Expert Talk on Entek Lanka YouTube channel. Thank you very much for subscribing us and watching us. Today we are talking about the power crisis and the solutions. To discuss this further, we are meeting Mr. Jayantha Wijesingha, who is also working as an environmentalist for the decade or a decade. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting.
So as we know that you have been working for the environment over a decade, so it's a good time to talk about the power crisis in Sri Lanka and solutions. What do you think?
Yes, in fact, we've been talking about the power crisis since 2012, which is, like you mentioned, close to a decade ago, since we started basically working on conservation matters in Sri Lanka. It's very timely that we should speak about the power crisis and associated issues about the renewable energy and the issues surrounding the polluting energy sources and issues surrounding the price hikes in terms of electricity tariff and all of that. So it is very timely.
So now we are in that kind of a crisis and to solutions of this crisis. To get the correct solution and talking about the other energies, and now these days a lot of people are talking about the coal power and the wind power and the alternative powers like that, especially the solar power and all that. So what do you think, how we go on this step by step to settle this matter?
Now when we speak about the energy crisis, initially we should mention that this has been this has been dragging for a long time, that we knew that there was a crisis in the making, and since 2014 there has not been a proper power plant that was built or power plants or power sources. For instance, in 2018 there were close to 2000 megawatts of solar power project that were pending, for which the investors would have paid altogether more than 100 million in terms of deposits to get these projects going, and that had not been honored. And similarly, all the other power projects, of course there were polluting power sources also in the pipeline, but in the meantime there were other better sources like wind power solutions, and like I mentioned, the solar power, and there was other waste to energy projects that were supposed to come long ago, which eventually took 30 odd people's life in Meethatumulla for us to end up having a waste to energy power plant in Keravalapitiya, which is now operational. But unfortunately the other one, which I believe is also a 10 megawatt power plant that was supposed to come in Karadiyana, which is half built and stopped so far. So there had been this crisis in the making, and we've been talking about it forever, but interestingly that this mafia that in operational in the power sector has been delaying the proceedings of integrating renewable energy and also building other power plants which are more environmentally friendly and suitable for the country. And what it does is that now in Sri Lanka, when you speak about most sectors, one can say that there are mafias all around, and that is why we are in this state, and we are pretty much a mafia run state for that matter. Like I mentioned, when there is a country that are run by mafias, which is no different to the power sector. Now what the power sector mafia was doing is that number one, they were not building the power stations. Number two, they were not allowing the small and medium power projects and investments into power sector, especially into renewable sector. And also they kept on buying emergency power and private power from outdated power stations belonging to private entities, predominantly run by the former CEB engineers and the engineers that are connected to CEB currently, working at CEB currently, and also running the country into darkness whenever they want to get their projects or their emergency power purchases or procurements passed through the cabinet and other means. So this has been a mafia, and because of this mafia, the renewable power sector was discouraged, and consumers becoming power generators were discouraged. In terms of consumers had the option of putting up a solar power plant there, but CEB continuously denied these consumers putting up their power plants in various ways, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, and by putting different tariff options, putting across different limitations as to how many kilowatts of power stations that they can put up on a rooftop, and also putting up other type of measures in terms of deliberately delaying or deliberately discouraging people obtaining solar power. While LECO, for instance, Lanka Electricity Company, the competitor of the CEB, was allowing interest rates at around 4 to 6% for people who wanted to put up a solar power project. CEB did not have that offer for a long time. So these are ways and means in which that the CEB was stopping people becoming producers and becoming independent of the grid, so that they could not have to depend on CEB, which CEB didn't like because they will lose their power. So this is basically the mafia that is in operation, which prevents the new power plants, good ones, renewable energy, coming into the getting connected to the grid in one way. On the other hand, they were promoting coal power directly all the time, saying that this is the baseload power that we want, which is very outdated, probably at least 60 years outdated. Some of these engineers would have learnt it long ago in their university, as coal power being one of the best energy sources, which is no more in the world. And unfortunately, Sri Lanka is opting to bad means of development. Now when it comes to power, we are going back into coal power. When it comes to waste management, we are going to landfills. These are century-old solutions, claiming as it that is the best one, now the one that built in Aruwakkalu. And when it comes to transportation, we are going in expanding roads more and more. While we had the option of having the light railway, for instance, we are going back in the past in terms of the development and saying that these are the solutions that we have. The engineers whose outdated knowledge supposedly say that coal power is the best power mode that they have, and they want to build a coal power, knowing that there is a government policy which will not allow coal power plants being built. There are certain court cases that have prevented power plants being built. So they are using this as a option or a bargain, claiming that we want coal power, knowing that it's not going to be built. In the meantime, with that, the other power plants being discouraged, like the renewable energy, stating that it cannot be integrated into the system, that they create a big vacuum in terms of energy, and they fulfill it by purchasing private energy, private power.
You are watching Expert Talk on Entek Lanka YouTube channel. Mr. Jayantha Wijesingha is joining us for the discussion today about the power crisis in Sri Lanka. So, do you think there's a conspiracy on this power crisis in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, it's exactly the conspiracy in terms of delaying integration of renewable energy, and thereby not having to enable the grid in a way that it can entertain renewable energy, number one. Number two, promotion of coal power, because some of these engineers were on the payroll of the coal companies, coal lobby, and also on the other hand, deliberately discouraging people consumers becoming generators or other producers in terms of having their own power stations such as solar power, and thereby creating a big vacuum in terms of energy, and that is fulfilled by way of private power purchases and emergency purchases, where suddenly when they create a crisis, like for instance they suddenly break down intentional breakdowns of Norochole, and then having to buy 300 megawatts of energy, because one unit is 300 into 3, we have 900 megawatts of energy at Norochole. One breakdown, you are buying 300 megawatts of energy from private companies under emergency power agreements, which earns at hefty costs more than 100 rupees a unit, and imagine the amount of units that are bought. These are hundreds of millions of rupees eventually annually earned by way of commissions and by way of corrupt money by this mafia. So there is definitely a mafia, and there is definitely a conspiracy to create a big kind of energy crisis in the country, and with that to benefit to receive the benefits by few mafia men involved in the power industry altogether, especially CB engineers.
As we know, Mr. Jayantha Wijesingha has worked with so many environmental organizations, and he's having an experience over a decade about the nature, the environment, and especially with the organizations who are working for environment. Now, according to experience, now we have been visited so many countries, and we have experienced a lot in Southeast Asia especially. How the other countries are going to settle this power crisis, especially about the European countries, Nordic countries like Norway and all that. So, what is your experience about the overseas reactions of this power crisis?
Well, looking at all the countries, how they are moving ahead in terms of energy and addressing power crisis, which is actually going to be one of the greatest crises of all for the next 50 years by 2050 as presumed by international organizations. Power crisis is going to be a big issue, just as much as poverty is a concern, food security is a concern, water security is a concern. Power crisis, power security in terms of power independence, and all of that going to be a big crisis. Now, a lot of the countries, if you see some of the countries that doesn't receive enough solar power, solar energy, solar radiation, have moved on to solar power in a significant way. For instance, Scandinavian countries, which does not have that much of solar radiation coming down in terms of the duration of the solar radiation, they are moving into solar power in a great way. And when you follow World Economic Forum and the forums such as that, how these countries are progressing in terms of solar power is so amazing. And on the other hand, wind power is another power source that all the countries are actually exploring into, and wave energy in the big way. Finland and all the other countries are moving into Finland, Denmark, and all the other countries, including Norway. And when it comes to Southeast Asia, if you look at the very countries that are trading coal, like Australia and China and India, are moving into renewable in a big way. These are the countries that are selling us coal. And even the African countries, probably we are getting some of the African countries to send us our coal also. Some of the African countries, how they are moving into solar energy is so striking and so shocking in a way, because that they have thought about this whole crisis and they are planning very well. And in China, there was a time there were 3 wind power plants that got built every day. There was a time. Now that is the rate of conversion in terms of China. China is not building any more coal power plants anymore, while they have all the resources that they could do, but they are not. And in India, for instance, India is moving into solar in a big way. Now today, almost all our solar equipments are coming from India, whether they are a good quality. In terms of the quality, there may be certain issues, but at least as a country, so India is actually moving really progressively in terms of solarizing the country. And a lot of areas in India, industrial areas and also rural areas, and also on the agricultural areas and agricultural farms and things like that, they are quickly moving on to solar in a rapid pace, and for that there is the significant government backing. And on the other hand, most of the other Southeast Asian countries and South Asian countries are also moving in the right direction. Now, for instance, a country like Bhutan, for instance, they are carbon negative as a country, and they are not at all looking at diesel or coal power or anything like that. They are always dependent on the renewable energy. So finally, to say, if you look at the entire world is moving on to the right direction in terms of moving on to renewable, and some countries are more progressive than others. And while a country like China that sold us the Norachole coal power plant, which had been operational and a used plant and an old plant that would have been divested, which they sent to Sri Lanka, which always has breakdowns, apparently many big breakdowns a year, and we still want Chinese engineers to come and fix it. Our engineers after almost a decade can't fix Norachala power plant when it breaks down. So the point I wanted to make is that the world is moving, especially with the sustainable development goals, where the countries have to cut down on the emissions, and therefore they need to cut down on the emissions from energy sector, including Sri Lanka, which have promised 4% of emission cut down from energy generation as mandatory cut downs and 16% as optional cut downs. So altogether we have to cut down 20% of our emissions in terms of energy generation. So we cannot think about diesel, we cannot think about coal power anymore. We'll have to move on to the renewable energies. And obviously I understand the fact that we need to have base load stations until we get our systems ready and probably also connected to another country or whatever. But until such time we were a country that was running 100% renewable in the 1990s. And we can still do that, and there is absolutely no way that no one can say no, we can't do that. I mean, we should be able to. That's why the engineers are there, and that's the definition of engineering, finding solutions. You can't say no, this is the only amount of renewable energy that we can integrate to the system. So therefore, to answer you, the world is progressing. We need to progress as well. We need to find solutions. We need to enable more and more renewable energy into our systems.
Now, your statement, of course, actually a remarkable insight for the discussion. And so, finally, do you think that Sri Lanka, can we change our attitudes and our perspectives and our ideas, especially, and other concepts to a better country, especially for the development and with the power and energy crisis and all that? Do you think personally about this matter?
Yeah, I think everything is possible. What it needs is like people to be aware, the consumers to be aware, and that if the politicians and the government is not taking action, to take actions ourselves, and for us to be energy independent whenever we can. Those who can afford to be energy independent, they can be energy independent, and others who can conserve energy. And by conserving energy, that you're helping in a big way in solving the power crisis and not giving up or not giving the advantage to the central CEB and the power ministry and all the other mafias that are involved, whether it's local or international, because in power sectors in any country there is a lot of external influence as well, because in Sri Lanka we buy a lot of diesel and gas. And when the LNG power plant is built, LNG power, which is from USA, and then you have the coal power plant, which is Chinese influence, and then you have the Mana solar power plant, which is Indian influence, Adani's. So it's like there is a lot of external influence also. So what we could do is that we can do, there is no doubt that we can change it. We can change it by way of changing ourselves individually if the politicians or the government is not doing. And the important thing, like I mentioned to begin with, is that to make yourself aware what's going on in the power sector, how is this mafia is operating, how is suddenly reservoirs go empty, and how is suddenly Norachala power plant breaks down, how much of money is spent on coal power, how much of money is spent on emergency power, and who's going to be benefited out of this. So as long as people are aware of it, being aware, knowing it is the first step, and change will come by knowing it.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Jayantha Wijesingha. Actually, Mr. Jayantha Wijesingha's statement was remarkable insight for our discussion, and he's having experience over a decade as environmentalist for the last 15 years, over a decade. And so thank you very much for the valuable time and valuable things that you have enlightened us with this discussion. So we would like to meet you with another discussion. Thank you very much for watching. Keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.